can ask people to just say hi in the chat, but you're live.
Say something.
Yeah, you're live. People can hear you.
Oh, they're here. I'm live.
Yeah, you're live.
Okay, here we go. Well, welcome everyone to Discovering Buddhism. And I hope you can see me. I can see there are a few people watching. So this is the first historical broadcast of Discovering Buddhism on YouTube, by me anyway. So there could be some little hiccups. Don't worry, we'll iron them out.
It's working well.
And Ben is here, our tech head, who will help if anything goes wrong. Okay, so if you've been here, you were here last week for our live class. Welcome. And I've emailed you the notes for tonight. So we'll have a look at those. And if anyone's new, hasn't been here last week, then I can send you the notes if you want to just give me your email. And there is at the bottom of your screen where it says say something. You could sometime during the session just say who you are and what your email address is, and then I'll be able to get in touch with you and you'll put you on the mailing list. Okay, so yeah. All right, so we, as always, usually start with a mindfulness meditation, and because this is the module of mind and its potential, particularly relevant to do some practice watching our mind and the breathing, mindfulness of breath, which we did last week very briefly. I'm going to do it again this session, probably for 10 minutes at the beginning. That is really the best practice to begin with when we're actually looking at the mind, how the mind works, getting familiar with our own mind, because it just allows us to see our natural state of mind and how things are working in there, becoming aware of our internal world. So just on the practice of mindfulness of breath, most of you, I think, are familiar with that. But I think some of you might be new to it. The main thing with mindfulness of breathing is to just quietly watch the breath without changing the breath. What we're doing is just allowing the breath to enter and leave the body. It's like we just step aside and watch as bystanders, just seeing that movement of the body with the breath. So with this practice, the main thing is to have a comfortable position, and sitting in a chair is fine, both feet on the floor, shoulders relaxed, the hands usually just resting together in the lap or wherever it's a comfortable position. So with the eyes, you can either have the eyes completely closed or just letting some light in, whatever's the most comfortable. Now, the session itself, we'll do 10 minutes tonight, but there's no magical number of minutes. If you've got little time, you can just do 2 or 3 minutes. If you've got quite a bit of time, you can extend the session. But if you are new to the practice, it's good to actually just keep them short, the sessions, maybe 5 minutes. And then next week, after do say a week of 5 minutes every day, and then perhaps extend it to 2 minutes next week. The standard sort of session for more experienced meditators is about 25 minutes. Alan Marsh uses 24 minutes. He's an expert on mindfulness practice, and he's chosen that number of minutes. But there's nothing particularly magical about that. Just adjust the time once you decide how many minutes you're going to do, good to stick to it, even if you feel you could go longer. Because they say that it's better to have shorter, sharper sessions where you're alert than to drag them out and just watching the clock. If you've sensed that you could continue, that's very good, because it means that you can come back when it's time to come back for another session, feel more positive. The cushion doesn't scare you. You feel quite comfortable coming back if you had a good experience in the last session. So, so in this tonight, we'll just basically do the breathing meditation. I'll guide it, but so adding on a slightly different practice, which is labeling thoughts. So when we're, as I said last week, there's two things going on in the mind when we're doing breathing meditation, mindfulness of the breath. One is concentration, we're actually being aware of one particular thing happening, which is our breathing. And the other one is called introspection, which is actually just checking. Are we still on that object, still on the breath, or have we wandered off? That's kind of like spying on what we're doing. So those two, concentration and introspection, are the two things that we're doing in our mindfulness breath practice. So with introspection, when we find ourselves wandered off, perhaps a noise, perhaps a thought of what happened today, just very common for this to happen, even after, for me, it'd be after a few seconds. But the good thing is that when we notice that we wandered off, that's actually something we can rejoice at when we see that, which we've actually caught the mind wandering, and we very patiently come back to the breath. So that's the very simple practice. Another possibility is to quickly look at what was distracting us, what thought was it, and labeling it. So we could just label it generally, a distraction, or it could be a more detailed label, just one or two words. Could be thinking about what happened today, thinking about what we're going to have for dinner. So you'll be quite amazed how mundane some of the distractions are. Certainly, for me, they're very mundane. So some of the distractions might be familiar. That thought again, or that worry that I've had for some time, that problem. So that's giving a little bit of a label to the distraction, and so that can help to actually just send it on its way, send that thought on its way, just to give it just one or two words, and then come back to the breath. So that can be helpful. So you can just try that tonight in our mindfulness of breath practice. Right, I think we'll just start our practice right now. Don't know if you heard that, but that was the gong going. Right. Okay, so coming now into our comfortable position physically. One thing that we usually just check on at the beginning is our state of mind, and it helps to actually just set a motivation where we're thinking that we're doing this practice not just for our own benefit. Obviously it helps us to have a calm mind, but it also helps all those other beings around us. So we have a motivation of doing practice not just for ourselves, but other beings. That's the Vajrayana motivation. Vajrayana Buddhism is the type of Buddhism that we're studying in this course. And this motivation to benefit others is said to have a very powerful effect on our practice, makes it much more strong. And so we just set that beginning. Now we just briefly scan the body for being comfortable, starting with the shoulders and the head. Being aware of how our body touches the floor or the chair we're sitting on. Feeling a gentle pull of gravity into the earth and giving ourselves to that gentle pull into the earth. It's releasing. Nothing to hold on to. At the beginning we can give more focus to the out breath. Have a sense of breathing out any physical tension in the body. And all the distracting thoughts, letting them go. Gradually we just give more attention to the physical movement of the body with the breath. Particularly the abdomen, rising and falling. And while we're just resting our mind on the breath, we're also using introspection to check, just spying, monitoring, are we on the breath or have we moved, have we wandered? And when we notice that distraction has come, we can gently let it go. And very patiently come back to the breath. And before we let it go, we can just notice what that distraction is, label that distraction. Could be memory, plan, or worry. Just one word, 2 words. Like bundling up that distraction and letting it go, sending it on its way. Just staying with that breath, quietly resting on the breath. The full flow of the in-breath, full flow of the out-breath. Just checking, are we still on the breath? If the mind's distracted, either just let go of distraction, or give it a quick label, what it is, and then let it go. And back to the breath, again and again. Okay, so just relax. So So just looking at what we're going to do tonight, a couple of questions to start off with, just to refresh what we did last week. Also, you'll notice I put a reference to Kathleen McDonald's book, How to Meditate. Excellent little book, which actually has almost all the meditations that we do in this whole course, and particularly the mindfulness practice. Another one we're going to do tonight, which is the continuity of mind. So, terrific resource for doing some practice at home. And you can also get it, I think, on in electronic form, digital form. So that's Kathleen McDonald's, and some of the meditations that are in the materials that are handed out, particularly in the transcript of the teaching by Dr. Yeshi. She has some of Kathleen McDonald's meditations in that transcript, which I sent out during the week. So I'm just having a quick look at the notes at the sides. So I haven't actually gone off there, but I'm just having a look at. Oh, Gabriel's there. Good, thank you. Great to see people tuning in. Wonderful. So let's have a quick look at the questions. Why does Buddhist psychology reason that our mind cannot come from our parents? Okay. Remember, we looked at the Buddhist concept of mind as a continuity, endless flow of consciousness without beginning or end. Last week, they often use the analogy of the river, which looks to be the same river as it flows past. We're watching it from the side. But actually, deeper analysis, we know that each part of the river is changing. Each molecule of water that goes past is a different risk molecule. In a similar way, the flow of thoughts and activity of the mind is constantly flowing, changing, and so if with that that example, we also have the Buddhist teaching that each moment, the cause of mind is non-physical. Mind is non-physical, as against the body. And so the cause of mind, where it arose from, must be non-physical. Okay, so the cause we're told in the teachings is a previous moment of mind. Previous moment of consciousness, of course, is the present moment of consciousness. And similarly, the previous moment of consciousness was caused by another previous moment. So we have this infinite chain of causes causing the next moment of consciousness. So that goes obviously back. And if we think back, last week we just thought back to the moment of birth, when this human body came into existence, and the human mind seemed to have come into existence. But if we look closer, if we look at the Buddhist psychology of mind, there must have been a moment of consciousness before birth. And then obviously we can trace that back to the womb. There was mind in the womb. And then we go back to the moment of conception, when this body was formed by the joining of the two cells of each parent. A physical cause, the physical cause of the body, the two cells of the parent. So that can't be the physical cause of mind, because it can't be the cause of mind, because mind is non-physical. But basically, the reasoning of Buddhist psychology is that the mind can't come from the parents, because the parents, all we got from the parents is our physical body, which is physical, and the mind is non-physical. So it must have come from some other non-physical origin, from nowhere. Is, you can just discount that really, just happened by chance, possible if you believe in chance, but still you'd have to accept that there's no cause. So basically that's the reason that they used for saying that our actual mental our mental consciousness didn't come from the parents. So that's, remember that on top of that, we've got, of course, as soon as we're born, we come under the influence of the parents. If we're brought up by our parents, it's going to be some conditioning. So the mind will obviously be influenced by the activities of the parents, and our behaviour, our training, our education, and so on. But that's actually not really about the question here. We're looking at where mind began, where it came from. Okay, so there we go. That's the first one. The second one is mainly just one to just think through yourself. How likely is the mind actually is just the brain? And actually there is no such thing as mind, because this is what most Western scientists and doctors and people working in the academic field would probably say. Not all. They just assume, this is a great assumption, that the only things that exist are things that we can see and measure, which would be the brain. That seems to be where most of that mental action happens. And so this mapping of the brain, very advanced now, we can actually see which parts of the brain light up, different activities of the mind. So without having to sort of produce all the reasonings, it's just something to think through why perhaps there is some doubt about whether if the brain is just physical. Does that answer a lot of questions? We looked last week at some things like how we can actually have things like the placebo effect, where we can become better when we don't actually have any physical medicine, and where sometimes we get sick as a result of our circumstances, but not necessarily what's going on in the brain. So these are just basically to just refresh our thoughts about what happened last week, and just basically to get you thinking about these issues. So we won't spend any more time on that. The other thing is, if you've got any questions as we go along, probably should have said this right at the beginning, you can just type that, what I said briefly, so you can type that on my screen. It's got something where it says say something. So I may be able to stop and answer the question. Remember, I can't actually hear you, and I can't talk. I can just talk generally to everyone. Or else, if the question somehow doesn't get answered, we can take a photo of the questions and I can answer them next week. Okay? Or even if I know your email and I know you, I could actually answer by email. So definitely there's ways of communicating and get back and forth. Okay, good. So now we move on to how the Buddhist psychology looks at the activities of mind and classifies these different actions of mind. And so basically, I'm using two approaches. One is looking at the vision of sensing the physical world and conceptualizing or thinking. So this actually will probably make sense, particularly in our sort of way of thinking, without even looking at Buddhist psychology. So it's quite straightforward, dividing up our senses, what we see, hear, touch, and so on, and dividing that from what we're thinking, these concepts, memories, emotions, and so on. But that's a very simple way. And then the other more detailed way, which is used most commonly in Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, is looking at these two types of minds, dividing things into main minds and mental factors. So I'm using the first way of analysing what's going on in the mind. This actually came from Wai Chong's class when he was teaching this. One of our teachers here, a very well-qualified teacher. more experienced than me, I must say. And so I've kept his analysis, and I think what it does, if we just look at sensing and thinking, it helps actually to understand the more deeper analysis of main minds and mental factors. So looking at the sensing activities of the mind, so this is said to be, so this is what we see with our senses, see, hear, and so on. So this is said to be non-conceptual. And the more formal definition I've got there at the bottom of page 1, sensing is a mental activity that knows an object without the use of concept, ideas, and words. Okay, we just hear, we just see, we just touch without any elaboration. These are called sense direct perceptions, and they conclude those very familiar sense activities: sense, seeing, hearing, smelling and tasting, which scientifically is actually the same taste, we're told. Taste, smelling and tasting, and touching, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, relying on physical senses. So there is this other unusual thing in Buddhist psychology where they have, I think, mental direct perception. So these are quite rare actions of the mind, and they're experienced by those yogis who have clairvoyance and have great realizations, where they have what they call mental direct conceptions that perceptions rather, not that don't depend on any physical sense faculties. So this sounds kind of miraculous, but I must say, as I've got to know some of these great teachers like Lama Zopa and Shay and Lama Yeshe, you can actually have to see that they are able to have clairvoyance. They can see very quickly people's mental states, and as great yogis, they can see how to help with clairvoyance. They can see what's needed to help that being and give specific advice. So it's very incredible skill. So anyway, we won't spend too much. I don't really understand the mechanics of it at all, but I certainly believe that there are such things as these mental direct perceptions, such as clairvoyance. So we'll just move from that on to the next one, the 3 conditions that you need to have sensory perceptions. And again, this is mostly fairly common sense. First of all, to give the example of looking at a flower, seeing a flower. So first of all, there needs to be the object there. There needs to be a flower to be seen. And in Buddhist psychology, they call this the apprehending condition. So I'm putting the big words there just so that they're familiar, because when you read the text and so on, they'll probably pop up, these words, but it's actually just an object, what you're looking at. We're just talking about, giving an example of sight and mind. So you need the flower to look at, you need sense faculty. So you need an eye that works. Okay? So just the eye organ that we refer to as the sense faculty. It's an eye that has what they call it. They call it a very subtle form that allows the object to be apprehended by the eye consciousness. This is called the empowering condition. So I think it is possible to have a perfectly functioning eyeball but not being able to see. And I've come across this as a friend of mine, who quite a close friend, who suddenly lost his eyesight as an academic. So he's obviously completely dependent on his eyes to read, do a lot of reading, writing, and so on. So for years he went to every best doctors in Australia, and none all was completely fine. But the sight would come and go, and usually it was related to his state of mind. If he was stressed, he would just get these sudden inabilities to see. It's like something blind. And this is not, when we were studying law, there was a thing that they called hysterical blindness that people could have if they were shocked, if they got some sort of trauma. And again, there's nothing wrong with the eyes, but they can't actually have that. They don't have this empowering condition to see. So that's the sense faculty, an eye that works. It's really the way I would summarise that one. And the third one is a preface moment of consciousness. So this brings us back to the mind that has to have the ability for something to be sensed, like the film in the camera. It has to be something, a moment of consciousness, and what causes the moment of consciousness is the previous moment of consciousness. So to bring this moment of consciousness that can see the flower into existence, logically there has to be a previous moment of consciousness. So there are the three actual conditions to see a visual object, see the flower. So there's also another thing to note, and that's that the actual sense, the physical, whatever sense it is, hearing, seeing, tasting, can be mistaken or valid. And they often give the example of a person who has joyous, which is hepatitis. I think it's the first type of hepatitis, I can't quite remember, which actually does make your sight misfunction, and you actually tend to see things with a yellowish tinge because the virus or the actual disease that's in your system has this effect on your visual sight. It's a physical defect. So we can have a valid sense of consciousness or a mistaken. And I just to let you know, I actually meant to put this in the notes, but I didn't. Most of the material that I'm using for this part of this discussion comes from the book that I gave you in the reading list last week by Geshe-Tashi Sering called Buddhist Psychology, which is on your reading list. Buddhist Psychology. It's folded up there. So backwards the way I said. So it's on your reading list. So it's an excellent. It's quite a bit deeper than we need to go. He has such a really very good way of putting things in a very Western context. So I recommend just having a look at that if you've got time to do a bit more reading. So that's the sense things that we see, and we could apply that example of the flower, what we see, to other sense consciousness, what we hear, and so on. So the second sort of category of things that we just think in our own mind, conceptualizing or thinking. And this is said to be more formal definition, realizing or knowing an object via an idea, concept, or image. So this covers things like when we've just done a meditation, those thoughts that keep distracting them, discursive thinking, it's often called, the mind as it wanders from one topic to another, just giving just a little bit of thought here, the moving mind. So it covers that activity, but it also covers things like imagination, when we just think of something that's not there. Could be something that doesn't exist, like a unicorn. It could be intuition, having a feeling that something's going to happen, either good or bad. It covers dreams that we have in our sleep. Insight. So these things can happen when we're studying Buddhism. Could take years to actually realize something as the truth. Could be coming to the realization that past lives exist, whereas we might start off with the idea that it's implausible. Or things like equanimity, how everybody's equally suffering, which we may not have actually realised before until we actually do some meditation on it, equanimity meditation. So these sort of realisations, again, things that mental conceptualizing or thinking. So some of the conceptualization. Some of the conceptualization is wise reflection, and some is incorrect thinking. So things like when we get angry is wise reflection, and some is incorrect thinking. So things like when we get angry, we mistakenly see that person as inherently bad from their own side, and we build a story and we hold on to it. So how dare that person say that to that hard? And we build a story and we hold on to it. So how dare that person say that to that hard? So this, from that we can develop hatred and so on. These are said to be negative emotions. They're actually misconceived. We'll come back to this probably in a later class when we look at negative emotions. And so there's sometimes wise reflection, wise thinking, wise realizations, and sometimes misconceptions, mistakes. So then I've just got a little note there. So the four big misconceptions: misconceiving that impermanent is permanent. Probably doing that most of the time because we tend to see things as very concrete. So special meditations we can do to just remind ourselves impermanence of the physical world. Good example is, the diseases we're going through, the disease we've got at the moment, how actually that's changed our world dramatically. Also, we've got it's changed our world dramatically. Also, our ageing, certainly, very much experiencing that. And there's the self, seeing the self, and there's the self, seeing the self. That's actually the other point, seeing the self as having a very permanent, substantial existence, which we learn in Buddhist philosophy is actually a mistake. The self is just imputed. We learn in Buddhist philosophy is actually a mistake. The self is just imputed. So these seeing suffering as happiness. So when we go after the temporary things which we grasp at, get some small immediate pleasure, but actually, if we keep eating the delicious food, it actually turns to suffering. So these things can be seen to be misconceptions if we spend some time analysing them. And even the big one is getting a correct view of how we see self. So this covers the basic categories of things that we rely on our senses to learn, to know, and things that we rely on our way of thinking, our mental conceptualizing. Probably most academically would be this second one. We learn how to analyze arguments. Most of the stuff we learn at university would be conceptualizing, thinking, using intellect. So this is actually still, it's used in a Buddhist practice when we do analytical meditation, and we'll do one at the end of the class tonight on continuity of mind. We actually use reasoning. So there's a use in conceptualizing and thinking when we study Buddhism. It's not just single pointed meditation that helps. Single pointed meditation sharpens the mind and gets it ready to look at other more deeper questions such as impermanence, compassion, so on. So we need both types of meditation, single pointed, concentration meditation, also analytical. So let's now just look at the So let's now just look at the oh, good. Ben's put the reference to that book. So let's just look at these, the more, which you find, put the reference to that book. So let's just look at these, the more, which you find in most of the text, the division of our mind into main minds and mental factors. So, having studied Buddhism for many years, it's still quite difficult for me to get grasp of this. Look at the note. It's quite complex, but I actually admire Buddhist teachings for having this incredible science of mind. There's really, I haven't studied Western psychology, but I'm pretty sure there's nothing as detailed and profound as the Buddhist study of mind. So there's the reference to Vishuddha Saran's book there. So they divide all our mental processes into two, main minds and mental factors. And there are 6 main minds. So we're going to use some of what we just did with sensory thought and also conceptual thought. So the first 5 main minds are the 6 senses: eye consciousness, what we see is eye; ear consciousness, sound; nose consciousness and tongue consciousness, taste and smell; and body consciousness, what we feel on our skin, these senses. But then they add the 6th one, which is mental consciousness. These are all different types of main minds. So the mental consciousness is said to be 2 types: perceptual and conceptual. So mostly we're conceptual, mostly we have concepts rather than direct perceptions. So just looking at what are these main minds, and Vishuddha Saran actually describes it in a, I think, very interesting way. He says it's actually like the movie screen that on which we're projecting the film. So at the movie screen, we actually, usually for watching a movie, we don't actually think about the movie screen, but it's got to be there for the images to be able to project it onto it. The images we'll see are the mental factors, which are very distracting, and what we are actually mesmerised by. We're looking at the mental images most of the time, so we actually don't really experience the main minds most of the time. We're actually just distracted by the mental factors. So these main minds act as a base, and the different mental factors are displayed on them. Okay, so the main minds are said to be neutral and passive. Sometimes it's said to be like the king. He also, Vishuddha Saran used the difference between the king and the ministers. The king tends to be just receptive to what the ministers recommend, and the ministers actually have all the advice and the opinions and so on. Ministers being mental factors and the king being the main mind. So another analogy there. So the main minds just accept what they see without judging. The movie screen doesn't decide whether it's a nice image or not. It's just there. So there's no intervening conceptual judging part of the mind. It's just receiving what goes on, what comes in. So only one main mind can operate at a time. So, for instance, if we're looking at the flower, going back to the example of the flower, visual consciousness, which is the eye consciousness, the first main mind. So the main mind just sees the form and shape without saying, "Oh, it's a nice flower," or "That reminds me of flowers," or the form. So it's just receiving the information, and it can't actually hear or feel that main mind. It can only see. So each main mind can only do that one operation. The visual eye consciousness can't hear or touch the flower or smell the flower, and similarly with the smell consciousness can't see. The smell can only smell. So this is another factor of the main minds. Only one main mind can operate at a time. And I gave the example when we're driving, when we talk on the phone, we seem to be doing two things at once. The Buddhist psychologists say actually that appears that you're doing two things at once. The main mind is going from ear consciousness to visual consciousness, back and forth very quickly. So there's the illusion that you're doing two things at once, but to visual consciousness, back and forth very quickly. So there's the illusion that you're doing two things at once, but Buddhist psychology says actually the mind can only do one thing at a time. So it's going back from one to the other. So, and of course, sometimes the main mind can be mistaken, and I've got that example of the jaundiced eye seeing everything is yellow, which is the basic example they seem to give in most of the teaching. There's probably many others. I guess thinking of sometimes we see a mirage. We think we see the actual mirage, but there's no water there. That might be another example. Just thought that off the top of my head. Another one we used to use a lot in Western philosophy, Descartes. You see a tower on the horizon, and it looks square, and as you get closer, it's actually round. So there's things where the main mind may not necessarily apprehend accurately. So these, they're the main minds. I'll just quickly go through the mental factors, and then we come back to quite the interesting point at the bottom where we actually look at what both main minds and mental factors have in common. So the mental factors, this is the phenomena arising from the mind, is what apparently I haven't got the Sanskrit word there, but if it's translated literally, it means phenomena arising from the mind. So it's an aspect of the mind that apprehends a particular quality of an object. So this is these are the images on the screen. Remember, the screen is the main mind. So these are what we find most interesting. They're busy and active, nice colours, nice sound, things that we can get attracted to or repelled by. Could be nice image or an ugly image, nice person, very nice person. So they evaluate and judge, gives rise to powerful emotion. So this is the mind that can not like a particular person because what they said or did, or perhaps for no particular reason. So they can give rise to powerful emotions, these mental factors. Or they could give rise to attachment, really like that new car, or that lovely new house, new computer, iPhone, whatever. So these are things that distract us with our various desires and so on. So now, just quickly looking, we'll probably come back next week to go through more detail of what these mental factors are. There are said to be 51, and they are sorted into those 6 groups there. Some of them come and go, and some of them are always there. Number 1, always present mental factors. Always there, and I've got them listed at the bottom there. Contact, discernment, feeling, intention, and attention. So, just briefly, we'll come back to them next week, but just briefly to show that they are obviously always present in this category. So we'll just quickly look at each one. So contact is the mental that connects the object and the primary mind. So that means that we have to have contact as the basis for our experience of pleasure, pain, and neutrality. So when we see the flower, there has to be contact. There has to be that initial communication between the flower and our mind. That's number one, contact. Second one is just might be slightly different order. Discernment, discrimination. So this is it enables one to distinguish and recognise an object as, say, blue, yellow, and so forth. This is where we see this is this sort of flower. It's the yellow flower, and it's also a daffodil. And it's so this is giving some categorisation, labelling, discernment. What's unusual? What makes this different from that other flower? So discernment allows us to sort of sort things out. This is this, and it's not that. So third one is feeling or sensation. So this is our experience of an object. So this is where we, our feelings, nice, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Could be there's no actual reaction. Not really interested in flowers. It just seems to be a flower, but clearly that's what it is. Or we might say this is my favourite flower. This is the one I love. This is the one I don't like. So that's the mental factor of feeling or sensation. So it's said that these feelings drive action. So obviously, if we like something, this is my type of flower, my type of person. I really like this person. I want to know more. But it drives our actions. It motivates us. And particularly if we don't like it, we can also reject it. So the actions that are driven by the feelings pretty skillful or unskillful, depending on our mind, our motivations, and I guess our mental development. Sort of more prone to negative actions, positive actions, and so on. So that's number three. Number four is intention. So this leads from feeling, leads on to intention. So something, an urge or inner force moving us to an object or against an object. So depending on what the feeling is, we have intention to move towards or move away from. And it's actually said to be as karma, this intention, because it precedes our physical and verbal actions. The intention can actually put positive seeds or negative seeds on our mind stream. If our intention is to do this action for the benefit of other beings, to help ulterior motive, altruism, then it's going to put positive karmic seeds on the mind stream. If we're there to harm that person, more selfish motivation, then put negative seeds on the mind stream. So the intention is very important for determining what quality of actions or how the longer term effect on the mind, positive or negative. And the last one is attention. Directs the primary mind to an object and grasp at the object. So attention means that we focus on the object without wavering. So we've got to obviously look at something or listen to something, or touch something. We've got to have our attention for all those other things to happen. Contact, attention, feeling, discrimination, and so on. So this always present mental factor. So we'll just sort of giving you a sort of an overview of how, sort of like an example of what mental factors are, and see how they, they're full of judgments and potentially good motivation or bad motivation. When we say that the quality of an action depends on motivation, it's why we sort of started our meditation practice this morning, at the beginning of the class this evening, with trying to form that Mahayana, the motivation to benefit others, because that's actually going to have this profound effect on our minds and subsequent mental actions. Very profound positive effect. So, I'm just having a quick look at the communications. Good to see people who have tuned in from last week, and some people new. See Louise is new, Paul new. So it's good to have you here, definitely. And remember, if I don't have a way of contacting, you can just leave your email address and I'll put you on the mailing list and give you access to all the materials. It's quite a lot. Is that actually, for people who weren't there last week, there's a bundle of readings that go with each module, which are actually extracts from teachings of Lama Zopa Lama, Yeshu, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which cover basically the topic that we're studying for that month. So I can email you those. Just now quickly look at I'm sorry, I'm just quickly looking at the input that's coming in. What's the question you asked there?
How you pronounce that Tibetan?
Lowry. Non-conceptual awareness. Oh, okay. The Ben was actually here, just asked a question, and I'm just trying to unravel up the kind of non-conceptual awareness. So, where are you reading it from? Is it on the note?
It's on the handout.
It's on one of the handouts. The reading.
Under sensing, it's non-conceptual consciousness. It's got the Sanskrit and the Tibetan. I just don't know how.
Okay, I'll maybe answer it after. Yeah, might take me a while to actually find it, and I probably may not know the answer how you pronounce it. Anyway, I'm not very good at or Sanskrit. So let's just quickly look at what main minds and mental factors have in common. So they arise together. Remember, if you think about the movie screen and what's being projected, of course you can have a movie screen without something filmed, there's something being projected. So you can actually have a main mind without interfering or distracting mental factors. And it said that, from what I read from Geshe Toshi Sering's book, he said that basically it's really only really highly realized meditators that can actually just experience main mind without the distracting mental factors. That's like something very, just studying that blank, the ability, say, to see or to hear or to have consciousness. So obviously those people have somehow have such a settled mind, they're settled the babble, the distracting thoughts, the mental factors, and they can actually just rest their attention in that deeper level of main minds. So that's what Geshe said in his book, that mostly ordinary people, and even people just without great realizations will have really be only aware of the mental factors, which is the more obvious part of the thought process. So they rise and cease together. So to actually have anything on the movie screen, you have to have both the screen and something being projected. So to see a flower, they both have the same aspect. So I think this seems to me that both the main mind and the mental factor will see the colour and shape of the flower. They actually see what what we see, the yellow flower and so on. But the main mind is neutral, just reflects that raw image, and it's the mental factor that will elaborate and come in with some sort of judgment or discursive thought or something that will remind you that flower, putting that flower in a sort of stream of experience and dressing, giving some sort of story about the flower. The same conditions produce them, so we still need those three conditions that we looked at. We need to have eye consciousness, we need the object, impermanent condition, and previous moment of consciousness. That's for eye consciousness. So how does that affect mental consciousness? I'm just thinking, I only just thought of this question now because the same conditions produce them. If we put mental consciousness in on top of those sensory consciousness, we obviously need to have they would say the human brain to have a human mind, and we also need to have a previous moment of consciousness. So the brain is sort of like the reception, the place where the mind is resting for that human life. And instead of needing I suppose in a way we need the brain to have a human mind, but what we need to have for a human moment of consciousness, the human brain and the previous moment of consciousness. Okay. But I think I mentioned perhaps last week that the subtle consciousness will actually continue on after the human body and the brain has died, and that subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness, will transfer to the next life in whatever form our karma throws us. So if human body, animal body, whatever, perhaps it will throw us to enlightenment, liberation, if we've practiced incredibly well. So I'm going to just say, if you do have a question, just to have maybe attempt to say something, and I'll see if it's possible for me to answer it or even get it, just to give it like a test run. If anybody, of course, that's not a very, you may have no questions at this stage. So if anyone does have a burning question they want to ask, if you could just you could type something in. If you think of something later, and you've got my email address, you can email me. I think when we finish the session, it's not possible to say something after that. If we write them, but once we've got some email communication, you can always email a question. Emails and questions are really welcome, and if I get them during the week, I can have time to sort of think up an answer, and I'll answer it the next class. Wonderful to get some questions. Can't promise I can answer them, but I'll try. Or I'll probably have to refer you to where you'll find the answer. It's better at that than actually answering it, I think. So I thought it's good actually, I'm a bit ahead of what I thought I'd be, because I want to actually do this meditation that we didn't have time to do last week on continuity of mind. So this is actually an analytical meditation. It's one in Kathleen McDonald's book. So it's very central to the topic of mind and its potential. It gives us a bit of experience of the nature of our mind, and a little bit of it's the idea is to actually give us a sense of the movement of mind from the past into the present, and from the present into the future. There's like this river of consciousness, which we often, because we're so preoccupied with the present, or maybe lost in daydreaming, future, or some memory, to actually spend some time feeling that connection of one moment of mind to the next. So what we do in the actual practice is we start off with what we were doing in the very first 10 minutes of the class, just looking at what's happening in the mind. But instead of focusing on the breath, we're actually just going to look at the discursive mind, what's actually coming in. We just allow thoughts to enter, and we see these flashing memories. So it's sort of like a lot of some teachers call it space junk. Topchen Yeshi calls it space junk, which is things flying through space. Could be a memory, a plan, an image, a worry, an emotion. And so that's what we start off with. And then we think, okay, so this is what's happening in the mind now. And we go back to the waking up mind this morning. And we think, okay, so what I'm experiencing now is slightly different to what I woke up with. I remember what I was thinking when I woke up. And we actually go spend some time on the waking up mind. And then we actually think that there obviously was a connection. I'm still alive. There is a connection between the waking up mind and the mind that I'm experiencing now. And there's in between with those, 12 hours of consciousness with so many different thoughts and so on. But that's obviously the connection. It's not the same mind I woke up with. There's a connection between that mind and the mind I'm experiencing. So we do that in stages until we go back to perhaps the dreaming mind, and then we go to yesterday's mind. And we just go back deeper and deeper, perhaps to the child, or back to the mind when we were a child, without getting involved in memories, but just thinking of a few things that we can remember way back then, and thinking, well, it's a different mind when I was a child. I can remember feeling that or doing that. And then comparing it to this current mind. So there's obviously a connection. It's not the same mind, but there's this connection, continuity, feeling that continuity of mind over the decades from childhood mind, current mind. And then we go right back to the mind that we probably can't remember, the mind when we were born. Some people can remember that, not many. And we acknowledge, we can use reasoning, that there obviously must be a connection between that and the child mind, adult mind, current mind. And then go back based on this premise that there must be a moment of mind before the current moment of mind, previous moment of mind, this mind. So there was a mind at conception, mind in the womb, and then mind at conception. Then we actually look at that mind at conception, where it came from the parents. We've already had a look at that. Obviously, it's a physical entity that we got from the parents. We've got the two cells from the parents, and which joined conception. We can't accept that causes the mind, because the mind is non-physical, and nothing physical can cause something non-physical. So it gives rise to the possibility that there was a mind before perception, which was this particular meditation, we can just think of that possibility, a previous moment of mind in a previous life, which came into the womb at the moment of conception. If that happened, then there must have been a previous life, and we can obviously think through the logic about this stream of mind coming from past life. So then we come back to the present mind, sitting here, the one that we experienced when we did our breath meditation, watching at the beginning of this particular meditation, that flashing thoughts and energy, and feeling that continuity, that incredible flow of mind stream that we've brought us to this point. Everything we've thought in the past brought us to this point. We can just touch on the idea that Buddhist psychology says that also everything we think or do or saying, body switching mind, makes an imprint on the mind. Positive acts, positive imprints, positive results, negative actions, negative imprints, negative results. So that's another meditation, but that goes with the continuity of mind, because there's these seeds in place on the continuity of mind, which we call karmic seeds, which are going to flow along the continuity of mind. Then sitting here on the cushion, current mind, this moment of mind causing the next moment, this moment of mind causing the moment after the class, causing the mind that we go home with, the mind we go to bed with, the mind we wake up tomorrow if we're lucky to have another day's living in this human body, and all the way up to the moment of death, when we have to leave this body. So this again, we get the continuity of mind from the present moment up until the moment that we have to leave the body, which is of course uncertain. We definitely have to leave the body, but the time is uncertain. So we get the idea of the future continuity. And with the knowledge that there is the opportunity now to put things in, to do things with our mind, to actually do mind training, to look at the mind's potential, to practice positive mental actions such as compassion, equanimity, wisdom. So given the fact that we've got access to Buddhist teachings now, which are actually incredibly profound, and giving us the complete path to liberation, where we can actually shed all the negative views, all the things that have caused us suffering. We actually have all this now at our fingertips, so we can actually use the current, what we've got left with this human body, with human brain, human mind, to work our way into freedom, peace of mind, liberation, and enlightenment. So that's basically the practice. We've got now just under 15 minutes, so we'll just do that, and then we'll dedicate. Okay. So we start with our comfortable position, getting settled, coming back to that state of mind, beginning of the class where we're fully aware of what's happening in our body, fully aware of what's happening in our mind. So perhaps using the breath to calm the mind, just coming to the breath, bringing our awareness to the movement of the body with the breath. And then to begin our practice on this meditation of continuity of mind, observing continuity of mind, looking at what's happening in the mind now, welcoming thoughts, allowing them to pass through the mind, and watching. We can perhaps feel whether hot or cold sensory things, whether sleepy, uncomfortable, hungry, things that's popping into the mind, some memory perhaps. Just allowing those images to come into the mind and leave the mind. This is our experience of our current mind, our current consciousness. This is what's happening in our mind. Sitting here, where we are, in a chair or a cushion. And going back waking up mind we had this morning. Might be able to remember our thoughts, have some thoughts. Mind. We had breakfast, got ready for the day. Those moments, mind at the waking up time, led on to the moments of mind during the day, what we did during the day. Morning mind, afternoon mind, led us up to this present moment of mind. Led us up to this present moment of mind. Having that sense of continuity of mind, each moment of mind leading to the next moment of mind. Each moment of mind slightly different from the next. Same continuity, but different content, slightly different content of the morning mind to the current mind. Then going back to perhaps the dream mind last night, if we can remember anything that happened in our dreams. Sometimes the dreams we have affect our morning mind, our waking up mind. Sometimes a good dream can resonate with us during the day. Be pleasant. Bad dream can also have the opposite effect and feel uncomfortable during the day. It makes the mind slightly unbalanced, perhaps. So the dream mind last night connected to the waking up mind this morning, connected to the current mind, that flow of continuity. And then we have yesterday's mind. Perhaps remember a few things. Yesterday's mind leading up to last night's mind, leading to the dream mind when we were sleeping, flowing into the waking up mind this morning, the current mind, continuity of consciousness. Going back a bit further, perhaps last week, a few things we might remember. Certain things happening in our mind. Those moments of last week's mind, leading into this week's mind. Flow of consciousness, flow of one moment of mind leading to the next. Perhaps going further back, something that happened earlier this year. Those moments of mind flowing to weeks and months that have happened in between, right up to the current moment of mind, those rivers of thoughts, feelings, perception, and going back even further, perhaps now, to our mind as a child. Perhaps we remember a few moments in our childhood, some highlights, perhaps positive things that happened, maybe negative things that stuck in our mind. Is it the same mind as the one that's sitting here in the room? Obviously the content of that mind as a child is slightly different period. We saw the world through the mind of a child. different content but the same connection. Childhood mind, adult mind, current mind, of continuity. Then going back to the moment of birth mind, on the public happening mind, right? Having had a childhood mind, there must have been a moment of mind at birth, connecting the birth mind to the childhood mind. Continuity of mind from the moment of birth to childhood, current moment of mind. And then, of course, if we go further to the moment of conception, there must be a continuity from the moment of birth mind back to the womb, or the mind of the fetus in the womb. Where did that moment of mind come from? There must have been a moment of mind of conception. Where did that come from? Think of the parents' physical joining of the two cells at conception can't be the cause of mind, which is non-physical. Is it feasible that that moment of mind came from nowhere? Is it feasible that that moment of mind at conception came from a previous moment of mind before conception, previous life? If that's feasible, then there are the possibilities of previous lives in different form that we can't remember, the continuity of mind. Coming back to the present moment of mind, feeling that vast stretch of continuity from moment of mind of perception, birth, childhood, adulthood, current moment of mind, all our human life, connected by moments of consciousness. Then thinking, this moment of mind is the cause of the next moment of mind. As long as I have a human body, a human brain, I have a human mind. Current moment of mind will lead to a next moment of mind. Tomorrow's moment of mind. If we're still alive, next month, next year's moment of mind. Up until the time of death, this human mind will continue until the human body ceases to function, dies, and the continuity of mind leaves the body. So coming back now to the present moment of mind, when I'm sitting here, meditating, having seen the continuity of mind in the past, thinking of the continuity of mind up until our future, until we have to leave this body. We now have opportunity to change the mind, to put positive influence on the mind. To as much as possible, avoid negative actions of body, speech and mind, and create positive actions of body, speech and mind, knowing that these will have influence on our continuity of mind. Buddhist teaching teaches us that we have now mind and its potential to travel the path to liberation. Buddhist teaching gives total 100% path, unmistakable path to eliminate all negative tendencies, purify all the negative kind of influence. This is all the previous great lamas, previous Buddhas have done. We too have a human mind, potential, Buddha potential to liberate that mind. Access to Buddhist teaching, access to centers, access to great teachers who've travelled the path, studied the Dharma, devoted their lives to teaching us the path to liberation in life. So we can now dedicate any positive merit from this practice to that session, or the other practice that we've done in the past, or do in the future, towards our liberation from all suffering. Our becoming fully enlightened beings. And being able to lead other beings to fully enlighten. So I'm just going to read a dedication by His Holiness the Dalai Lama that he often gives at the end of his teachings. It's also very good for the mind. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, hungry find food, and the thirsty find water and delicious drink. May the poor find wealth, and those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective, and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all those who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. Alright, that's the end of the session. Thanks so much for being here. A few minutes late. So remember, we'll be here next time, next week, same time. Probably be doing a session from home, but we'll definitely be doing a session next week. And if you have any questions, just send them by email. And if I don't have your email, send me your email address. All right, good night. Have a good week. See you next week. On screen.